We begin this morning with the debt ceiling bill now one step closer to passing through Congress.
Last night, the House voted 314 to 117 to pass the deal, which was agreed to last week by President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy. But it was a joint effort with more Democrats voting for it than Republicans. Now, with the potentially crippling default deadline of June 5th just days away, the bill goes to the Senate for a vote there. Last night, Speaker McCarthy admitted the bill may not be perfect, but it's critical that it gets to the president for his signature.
Is it everything I wanted? No. But sitting with one House, with a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic president who didn't want to meet with us, I think we did pretty dang good for the American public.
Joining us now is NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin. Julie, good morning. So before the vote, there was some concern that McCarthy would not get the votes he needed. In the end, it was 149 Republicans voting for it compared with 165 Democrats. What's the big takeaway here?
Well, you'll see that there are members of the far right and far left, both under McCarthy and under Leader Jeffries, who opposed this bill. And for McCarthy, the fact that more Democrats voted in support for it than members of his own party is going to prove interesting for him in the weeks ahead, because we already heard from some conservatives who want to bring up a motion to vacate. They're questioning McCarthy's leadership. Remember, to even get the speakership gavel, he had to make those concessions. But let's talk about what's in this bill. You see that the White House actually ended up getting a lot of wins here when they negotiated this bill. Republicans will tell you, as they've told me all weekend, that the only thing Republicans conceded was actually lifting the debt ceiling. But for Democrats, they did oppose work requirements to Medicaid. President Biden held the line there, but they did have some work requirements that changed, particularly when it comes to food stamps. But all in all, this bill does lift the debt ceiling through the 2024 election, through 2025, until 2025, and it does have some spending cuts, the CBO estimating that that will be around $1.5 trillion. Listen to McCarthy from yesterday. Take a listen to what he said.
I've been thinking about this day before my vote for Speaker, because I knew the debt ceiling was coming. I wanted to make history. More than 2/3 of our conference voted for it. We got all the Democrats who signed a discharge petition to say they would never raise the debt ceiling, only raise it clean. We got them to vote for it, too.
There you heard it. McCarthy still saying that he had the win here just by getting Democrats to the negotiating table, and we'll see how that vote falls in the next coming days.
Julie, what I was going to say is there's bipartisan agreement over how adorable your dog there is in the background. But there's bipartisan opposition to this bill. Some Democrats expressed concern about the added work requirements, about the spending cuts. What is it they're saying now?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, this is one of the big concessions that Democrats here, President Biden, had to make in order to avoid a default, which we knew Republicans were pretty serious about holding the line on in order to get those spending cuts that they wanted. Look, Democrats, by and large, are unhappy with the fact that work requirements were altered in this bill. It will be harder for Americans specifically to access food stamps if they're able-bodied, if they don't have any dependents. It raises that age from 49 to 54. Here's what Leader Jeffries had to say to that point, despite voting for the bill and a majority of his caucus supporting it as well.
And I think once we emerge from this manufactured GOP crisis, one of the things that all of us should do legislatively here in the United States Congress, administratively, legally, is to explore all options so that we can remove this weaponized vehicle to hold the American people and the economy hostage in incredibly irresponsible ways.
Now, obviously, that will be challenging because Republicans do control the House and Democrats, of course, control the Senate with a very slim majority. But all in all, you did see Democrats come around for this bill. You do hear from some progressives, though, who are very unhappy with the fact that work requirements are altered. This is something that affects a lot of their constituents. For example, Richie Torres in New York, he said over the weekend that this would very negatively impact his constituents in the South Bronx. But you see that Democrats did end up going along for this deal because, of course, President Biden is the leader of their party, and he was able to negotiate this. And at the end of the day, it will avoid the default deadline that is just around the corner.
And Julie, after the vote, President Biden tweeted, "The bill protects the country's economic recovery." Of course, it still has to go through the Senate real quickly. Does it face any hurdles there?
Oh boy, sure does. And look, there's a group of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate who all want amendments for different reasons, but they don't have time for them, right? Leader Schumer is going to have to promise to put some of them on the floor, however, because they want this bill to move swiftly before that June 5th deadline. So all hope for swift passage of this bill in the Senate so that it could get to President Biden's desk.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you so much.
The race for the Republican presidential nomination is heating up with two major names set to throw their hats in the ring. Both Mike Pence and Chris Christie are preparing to make their announcement next week. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has already hit the ground running and is stepping up his attacks against frontrunner former President Donald Trump. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
The race to take on the Republican frontrunner, former President Trump, is getting more crowded, with two former Trump allies turned critics about to jump in. A source familiar with the planning tells NBC News former Vice President Mike Pence is set to formally announce next Wednesday in Iowa. Pence, who often touts Trump administration achievements, has recently blasted Trump's actions on January 6th, saying his reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol that day. And I know history will hold Donald Trump accountable.
I think the times call for different leadership, and I'm confident we'll have better choices.
And now former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is planning to announce he's running, two sources tell NBC News. Christie slammed other Republicans for not hitting the former president hard enough.
You can't beat Donald Trump by playing bumper pool and hitting it off three cushions and hope that it goes in if it goes in the hole. That's not the way it works.
Trump's big lead in the polls not scaring away the competition. The man seen as his toughest opponent, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, on his first official campaign swing through Iowa, stepping up his attacks on the former president.
We chose freedom over Fauciism, and we are better off for having done that.
And responding to new criticism from Trump.
Even Cuomo did better.
Who suggested New York's former Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo handled COVID better than DeSantis did in Florida.
6 months ago, he would have never said that, right? He used to say how great Florida was. Hell, his whole family moved to Florida under my governorship. Are you kidding me?
Some voters, though, skeptical he can take on Trump.
Do you think the governor should be running this time around or not?
I kind of think he should have waited until 28.
Our thanks to Gabe Gutierrez for that report. Let's bring in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray for more on this. Mark, good morning. Let's start with Mike Pence. What does he represent within the Republican Party, and how is he separating himself from former President Trump ahead of this announcement?
In the interviews that he's conducted, including with NBC News, Mike Pence talks about the achievements that the Trump-Pence administration were able to make over 4 years when Donald Trump was president and Mike Pence was vice president. But he has broken from his boss by criticizing Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th and afterward, and also calling for a new generation. But one of the challenges that Mike Pence will end up having is that he's not completely welcomed by the entire Republican electorate. A recent Monmouth poll showed that 46% of Republican voters ended up saying that they had a favorable view of him versus 35% who have an unfavorable view. That's significantly worse than the ratings for both former President Donald Trump and his chief rival, Ron DeSantis.
The other person expected to throw his hat into the ring, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He carried out an unsuccessful presidential campaign back in 2016, even though he was considered a top candidate for the position then. The crowd now for 2024 is already growing. So what approach does Christie need to take this time around to truly stand out? And will his endorsement of Trump in the past play a significant role?
Yeah, I mentioned Mike Pence's middling numbers in that Monmouth poll. Well, Chris Christie has an even bigger challenge. That same Monmouth poll had just 21% of Republican voters giving him a favorable view versus 47% unfavorable. That is one of the worst ratings that we have seen for a presidential candidate trying to run in his party in recent American political history. So that is a really tough challenge for Christie. But as you did mention, he has criticized former President Donald Trump repeatedly, and if not the chance to actually win the Republican nomination, you could actually see his bid as an entry is to hit the former president hard and often.
Former President Trump has already attempted to undermine several of his opponents in this year's race, much like he did during his campaigns in 2016 and 2020. Will that be enough to keep him in the lead, given the legal battles that are ongoing against him right now? And are voters in the same places they were nearly 4 years ago?
Yeah, so the recent polls show Donald Trump with a commanding Republican lead, but it's important to note it is still early. A lot can end up changing, including those potential indictments against the former president that I think many people are waiting on. But yeah, right now you have more than 60% of Republican voters who believe that Donald Trump represents their strongest challenge to Joe Biden in a general election. And if that doesn't change, then yes, Donald Trump remains the very big front runner in this entire contest. And I would just add, the larger the field, probably better for Donald Trump, too.
All right, Mark Murray, we know you'll keep an eye on all of those candidates. Thanks so much. Now to South Carolina, where convicted double murderer Alex Murdaugh made his return to the courtroom. Murdaugh was back in front of a judge for the first time since being sentenced for killing his wife and son. But this time he was there to plead not guilty to 22 new federal charges he's facing in connection to financial crimes he's accused of committing, including wire fraud and money laundering. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us now to discuss this further. Danny, good morning. So last week, we know Murdaugh's attorney said in a statement that Murdaugh is, quote, cooperating and that they are confident the charges can be resolved quickly without a trial. What are your thoughts on that?
This is going to be a guilty plea. It is a foregone conclusion. The vast majority of federal cases end in a guilty plea. Those that go to trial, the vast majority, I'm talking over 90%, end in guilty verdicts. So just off the bat, the odds are this is going to be a guilty plea. But you don't normally have a defendant who in a prior case essentially admitted to a wide swath of the crimes he's currently being charged with. This is going to be a relatively easy case for the government. Murdoch already admitted to all of the conduct or most of the conduct that forms the basis of many of these charges. So this is just a prolonged guilty plea. This is not about trial. This is about negotiation. And by that, I mean the government holds all the cards and the defense is trying to negotiate some kind of favorable deal, something that they can live with, even though it may be largely symbolic if Murdoch is spending the rest of his life in state prison on his state convictions.
Last week, his longtime friend pleaded guilty to similar charges. He admitted to helping Murdoch steal over $4 million in the wrongful death lawsuit of his housekeeper. Do we know how that will impact Murdoch's defense, given that he's already in prison on those murder charges?
It will be another brick in the wall, a wall that is already formidable. But yes, in any case, when you get a cooperator to enter a guilty plea, and if that cooperator is a co-conspirator and he's cooperating with the government, that is a devastating tool that state and federal prosecutors use all the time. Cooperating witnesses are deadly to a defendant. I've cross-examined them. You can expose the fact that, yes, they are criminals. Yes, they are testifying in exchange for some benefit from the government. But juries seem to understand that all of that aside, it takes a criminal to catch a criminal. And they often end up believing these cooperating witnesses. But look, this is just academic. I mean, like I said, this cooperating witness is just another arrow in the quiver of the government. The government already has an airtight case, it seems, against Murdoch. Most of the evidence coming from the mouth of Murdoch himself when he took the stand under oath and essentially admitted to all kinds of financial criminal activity.
Yesterday's hearing, his defense attorney said there may be a change of plea hearing in the near future. Do we know what that could mean for the case and Murdoch's defense?
Yeah, procedurally, a change of plea hearing is simply, at the first hearing, he entered a plea of not guilty. Every defendant does that. I actually don't even think that the court would be set up to take a surprise guilty plea right there. So just as a matter of course, every defendant pretty much enters a plea of not guilty. It would also be ridiculous to enter a plea of guilty without at least negotiating something in return from the government. This is really, again, negotiation, not trial practice at this stage. So later on, we'll get a change of plea hearing that notifies the court and everybody else, hey, we're going to set a new hearing, and that hearing is to change your plea. Obviously, from not guilty to the other option, which is guilty.
All right. Danny Savalos, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Summertime is almost officially here, but it's already starting to feel like summer if you live in the Midwest and the Northeast.
For more, let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman for a check on your morning news now weather. Angie, good morning.
Guys, it's officially June 1st. That means a couple of things. It means the start of hurricane season, which we're going to talk about. And it also means that it's officially meteorological summer. Now, astronomical summer doesn't start until the summer solstice in later parts of June. But either way, it's feeling like summer, as you just mentioned, in parts of the Northeast, in the Midwest. And we're also already tracking one area here for potential development over the coming days. This, whether it develops or not, is really going to impact the state of Florida a whole lot over the next couple of days. So much so, we've already seen flood watches go into effect for southeastern portions of the state. Here's what we're dealing with. This is the area we're watching. It's fairly unorganized. We're calling it Invest 91L. Basically, that means that they're just looking into this area for potential development over the coming days. And right now, it stands at 20% for it to develop in this red area right here. Now, I mentioned either way, whether it does or not, the impacts really don't change a whole lot. We're dealing with the heavy rain that will continue to be pushed onshore for the state of Florida. That low pressure will kind of meander in the Gulf of Mexico, but it definitely enhances the rainfall that we'll see as we get into today, Friday, and even into the early parts of Saturday. We'll see those local downpours with high rainfall rates. We know the troubles that Florida really has with dealing with heavy amounts of rain in a short period of time. So we'll look for that to be something they'll have to deal with as we get through the first half of the weekend at least. There's that flood watch that I mentioned with the heavy rain on tap. We'll see maybe upwards of 5, even 6, even higher than that as far as the rain totals are concerned by the time we get through Saturday. Now, it's not just Florida, rather, that's going to deal with the heavy rainfall through the rest of the work week. We're also seeing parts of the plains that could pick up maybe 1 to 2, even up to 3 inches of rain. This includes parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and into Kansas, where localized flooding will be possible. That same area also will have the potential to see some stronger storms this afternoon and into the evening hours. That includes the potential for some hail, as well as the wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Tornado threat is low, but it's not zero, so just be aware of that. We're going to be watching for that to be a potential here. Even tomorrow, that threat will be a little higher in that same kind of area. We're not seeing a whole lot of movement with that area that we'll be concerned with for the stronger storms, and the threats remain fairly similar. Some larger hail tomorrow, but still same kind of area that will be monitored. Now, to the summer-like temperatures, I mentioned that it's officially the start of summer when you ask a meteorologist, and it definitely feels like it. Places like Detroit hitting 89 degrees today, Chicago at 90 degrees. We'll see records likely. Burlington expected to hit 94 degrees this afternoon. Their previous record for this date, 91. So we're going to blow past that with a temperature that's 22 degrees above average for this time of year. So really impressive kind of heat that has settled in to parts of the Midwest and the Northeast. New York tomorrow, 89. Washington, D.C., 91. If you're looking for something slightly cooler, we've got good news for you. We'll see these temperatures kind of settle into more normal, more typical ranges here as we get into the first half of the weekend. The heat is still on for Washington, D.C. on Saturday, guys, but it ends up 75 on Sunday, but back to the 80s we go in that area by Monday.
All right, going to test those air conditioners early. Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. In Washington, a showdown is brewing between the House Oversight Committee and the FBI. And FBI Director Christopher Wray could end up facing contempt of Congress charges. All of this is over a document the committee wants to see related to an investigation into the Biden family's business dealings. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now to explain. Ken, good morning. So let's talk about this investigation the committee has conducted and this form they want to see. What is the form? Why is it so important?
Good morning, Joe. Well, Republicans say that this form describes a tip that came into the FBI in 2020 alleging that Joe Biden, while he was vice president, accepted a $5 million bribe from a foreign national in agreement to influence policy. And they want a copy of the document. They say they've already actually seen the document, so they say they know what's in it. They want the FBI to produce to them a copy of it. They have subpoenaed this document. Chris Wray spoke to the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer, yesterday and offered to let him come to the FBI and look at it. But the FBI does not want to turn this document over because it's sensitive. It describes a confidential human source. And also there's the principle of the thing. The FBI generally does not provide very sensitive law enforcement related, investigative related information to Congress, raw information, because they say it could jeopardize the lives of sources. It could undermine public confidence in law enforcement. So there's a real standoff here. And the House is now threatening to hold FBI Director Christopher Wray in contempt of Congress and make a criminal referral to the Justice Department, Joe.
Yeah, so Ken, if that happens, if FBI Director Wray is held in criminal contempt of Congress, what happens next?
In a word, nothing, Joe, because it would be up to the Justice Department, the Biden Justice Department, specifically the U.S. Attorney in Washington, to act on that contempt citation. And we've seen this movie before. Attorney General Bill Barr was held in contempt of Congress way back when Attorney General Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress. The Justice Department generally does not act on these contempt referrals, with the exception, of course, of Steve Bannon, who was prosecuted, and Peter Navarro, a former Trump advisor who is facing trial. But those are much different situations. These kinds of political disputes, generally the Justice Department stays out of it, so it's really a symbolic thing.
All right, Ken Delanian, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.